Alright, welcome back to my lecture video. So for this session or recording, we will discuss about namespaces and classes. So namespaces is a way for C# to organize your classes. In this way, there will be no naming collisions or duplicate names if you are declaring another class. Like for example, in the future, if you will be developing large systems using C sharp, there are times that you'll be working or collaborating with other developers. So there will be times, or most likely, that uh, one or two or more developers created the same name, or it just happened that you declared or name your class the same as your other colleague or other fellow developer. So namespaces are a gateway for you to avoid such circumstances or situation. So in C sharp, I mean in Visual Studio community, for you to create a new class or right no, so you just have to right click in your solution. So right now the project name is hello, and when you right click on it, you'll see a menu, and then under add you'll see this class. So click on it and you'll be directed to this window. So there's a lot of things that you can add here, but we'll just focus on class. So of course you have to name your class. Like for example, grade. So I'm going to create a class called grade, and if you click on the add button, you will be generated with this code. So as you can see, it already added the necessary libraries for your uh, namespace or your class. So we will just cover this later on, but we'll just have to focus on these lines. So as you can see, it already created a namespace called hello. So in your IDE or in Visual Studio Community, the default namespace is the name of your solution or your project. And inside this namespace, this is where your classes is found. So as you can see, we created or named our class as grade. So I've already added other classes here, like for example the guest. If we open this, you'll see the same thing. So it is organized or encapsulated or wrapped with the namespace called hello. So this way, all of your classes are organized. So so same as in Java, you declare your class, you declare your constructor, like for example public guest. So for those who have forgotten what is a constructor, so a constructor is a method where that is triggered or called when the class uh, when you create a reference to the class. So like for example, remember we have here the class guest. So let's try to do create a reference to that class or creating an object. So if you create an object, so let's say guest. Okay, so it's not showing up. So you can see it doesn't show in the suggestion or in your IntelliSense. So for you to use this class, you need to uh, use the keyword using and then the namespace like hello. So this means that all of the classes inside the namespace hello will be used or imported. So same as in Java, we use the keyword import. So in C sharp, we'll be using. So that's very straightforward. So with that, we can use all of the classes under the namespace hello. So let's try that. So let's say guest. So as you can see, it already suggested the class that we want. So when we create an object that reference to a class, so it should be like this. So guess the identifier. So you can see here, it already suggested the correct line or the lines that we wanted. So let's say guess tab equals to new guess. So now the variable or the object guess is now a reference to our class guess. So to demonstrate how constructor works, um, let's try to print in the command line. So let's say guess constructor. Okay, let's do that. So take note again, the constructor is being called when the class is being referenced or created. Okay, so let's run this. So as you can see here, we have a line here that says guess constructors. So meaning when you create an object or a reference, this is an equivalent to the constructor. So this constructor is being called when we create a reference or an object for the class. All right? And also in C sharp, we can create other methods and properties, like for example public yes ID, yes, we can do that. It has been suggested by the IDE, so we'll just take this, and maybe in our constructor, let's assign a value for the ID. So ID, oh sorry, so ID maybe let's say 100. So let's do that. So in C sharp, what we see here on this line is we created a getter and setter. So a getter is a method that will allow you to get the value of this property, while set, it's in the name, so it will allow you to set the name of the of the value of this property. So take note, this is a property. So basically a property, it's just a variable inside a class, right? So maybe let's try to set the value for the ID, yes, for the ID property. So since the object guess is now a reference of the class guest, now we can access all of its properties and methods. So let's try that. So guest dot ID equal to say 200. Now this time, before in the if when we created a new object, the constructor was executed, and in that constructor we assigned a value for the ID property, and after that we assigned another um, value for the ID property. So maybe let's try to display guess that ID, then same thing. So let's see the difference. All right, so as you can see, it first displays the 100 number, since in the constructor we assign the number for the ID property, which is 100. So this just a proof or tells us that the constructor was executed. While on the other hand, we assign another value for the ID property, and then it changes the value to 200. So as you can see, this is how we can access or set the value for the property. Let's create another method. So let's say public yes, string. No, not this. Generate ID. So same as in Java, when we create a method or property, we have to make sure what is the public access modifier. So if it's public, then anyone from outside can access this property. While private, only the class itself can access the resources. And after that, next is the data type for the method. So what will be the return value? So if it's string, then it is expected that the return value is a string. So if the return value is an integer, then the expected value is a number or integer. So as you can see here, there is an error here. So it says cannot implicitly convert type string to integer. So since the return value is a string, so the IDE gave an error that supposedly the return value is an integer. That is because that's how we created the method. So let's put it back to string. Then maybe ID let's say 20 22 dash ID class dash A. So supposedly this class will generate the proper ID for each guest. So that might be the let's just assume that this is how the class works, or it is how we design this class. Okay, so let's try to access it and display. So instead of displaying the ID, sorry, so console that right line, then guess that generate ID. Okay, so let's try that. Let's run it. Something's wrong. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, for some reason it failed to display the output. Okay, so now it gives us the ID that was generated. So as you can see here, 2022 dash, and these 200 was derived from the property ID. So if we're going to change the value for the ID, then automatically the ID number will be updated. So let's try, let's say okay, 4 digits. So let's try that and run it, and obviously the ID will change based from the value of the ID. All right. So what else? Okay, maybe let's try this as private. Okay, so let's see what will happen. And as you can see, it already gave us an error, and it says guess that generate ID is inaccessible due to its protection level. So that's it. So we have here the error was very obvious. So let's put back to public. All right. All right. So far so good. So another thing that we need to try is inheritance. So inheritance is like for example, if you want to access the properties or methods of another class from your class, then you might want to try inheriting that object. So for us to properly set an example, let's create another class. Let's say student. Okay. Let's say that this student needs a grade, right? Like the class that we already have here. Let's maybe each student should have a grade, so something like that. So for us to inherit from another object, or I mean class, then in Java we use extend, but in C Sharp we just use colon and then the name of the class. So in our case it's grade. Now all of the properties and methods of the class grade can now be accessed by student. So take note, this inheritance it depends on the access modifier. Remember the public, private, and protected. So those inheritance depends on those three. As what I've said earlier, public can be accessed or inherited by any object or outside entity, while private is only for the class itself. So it cannot be accessed by any object or classes. But the third one is protected. So remember the public, public, private, and protected. So the third one is protected. So protected, it means that only the child class can access it from the parent class. So in our case, grade is the parent class while the student is the child class. So anything from the grade that contains a protected access modifier, then it can be accessed by the child class. So for example, let's create here, let's demonstrate all public string, let's say um, test one. So let's try it to be as simple as possible. So maybe void. So void meaning there is no return value. Private, oops, private void test2, and the third one is protected void test3. Okay, so let's try accessing these three from the parent class, which is grade. So this is the parent class, and from the student, which is the child class. Okay, so let's create a constructor. So always the constructor is always public. So constructors are always public. Okay, it should be. Okay, so let's get that on the way. So let's say public constructor for this class, which is student, And take note, the constructor doesn't have a return value, or it doesn't have a data type here. So as you can see, it only asks for access modifier. Okay, so first one is the test one, which is public. Okay, so let's do that. So test one. All right, so let's try to print console just test one. Okay, and in our main file or the program, let's create a reference. Let's comment it out. Student. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's try to run this. And there you go. It gave us the text test one. So we have successfully accessed the public method of the parent class, which is the grade. Since test one of the property of grade is a public, so that's easy. Now next, let's try to access test 2. So let's print out test 2, then test 1, then test 2. Okay, now it gave us an error. That's because inaccessible due to its protection level. So you'll appreciate this protection level later on if you're building enterprise level applications. So it's very important to protect your data. It should not be accessibly available openly. If it's very sensitive, then it should not be. Now the test 2 is a fail. It gave us an error. That is because it is private. So meaning the class grade here has only access to this method called test2. That is because it's private. Okay, next. Okay, since this is an error, let's switch to test 3. Now there's no error. That is because test 3 is protected. So only classes that inherits from this class grade has access to this property or method. So that's basically how the protected access modifier works, right? So it's still available. The test3 method is still available. That is because the student class is inheriting the parent class called grade. Okay, so even under the student class, let's see, student dot what was that, test 1 still available. It can still be accessed from any entity or from the outside of the class. That is because the test method is a public method, so anyone can access it. So let's run it. Then you'll see we have here two tests. Oh, I almost forgot. I forgot to add a print here. So instead of test 2, let's try test 3. At least we'll see that it is actually working. So let's try again. Then you'll see that it first displays the test 1. That is because we printed this in the constructor, this one. And the test 1 method came from the parent class called grade. And the next one is test 3. That is because it is protected, so it's still available. And lastly, we printed another or called method again on this line. That is why we are seeing another test 1. So that's how basically how the namespace and classes works. So there are still a lot of things that we can learn about the namespace and class. But so far, this is still an introductory topic. So hopefully we will encounter more how can we utilize the namespace and classes. So hopefully I will just see you on the next recording. So hopefully you have learned something. Thank you.